Hello and welcome, this is Redditosker. In today's video we're going to be doing 4 more spoiler-free tips that I feel will improve your Elden Ring experience. Let's go ahead and get started. Tip 1. Use throwing knives to prevent the enemy's stagger meter from draining away. If you're like me, then you enjoy playing aggressively and frequently breaking your enemy's stance. And the problem with this is that the enemy's stance meter drains very quickly if you're not attacking him constantly. In order to prevent this, you can use throwing knives. Throwing knives will not only prevent the enemy's stance bar from draining away, it actually fills it. As you can see in this clip, this troll requires 2 jumping attacks and 1 fully charged R2 in order to have his stance broken. You can instead do 1 jumping attack and 1 fully charged R2, and then use throwing knives to keep the rest of his stance bar from draining away. And as you can see, just the throwing knives can fill his invisible stagger bar and stance break him. They don't just prevent it from draining, they actually fill it themselves. Okay, next tip. Some Ashes of War do a lot of stance damage. There are some enemies and bosses in Elden Ring that do not have many openings in their combos for you to do a fully charged R2. A prime example of this early on is Crucible Knight. Crucible Knight is not only notoriously difficult and doesn't have very many openings, but the few lengthy openings that he does have get narrowed after his second phase, which makes him extremely difficult to stance break without the use of weapon arts. Luckily there are weapon arts that come out really quickly and do a lot of damage to both health and stance. Notably from the weapons that you can potentially start out with, you have the Uchikadana and the Longsword. With these Ashes of War and Ashes of War like them, it's possible to stance break even dangerous enemies with few openings like Crucible Knight. Alright, tip 3. Always thoroughly check places marked as ruins in the map. Out in the overworld there are a lot of ruins, but some ruins are actually marked as ruins on the map. These places almost always have an underground area with loot, and this loot can be easy to miss because these ruins often also have something at the top that will distract you. For example, there could be a boss encounter up there, and you might assume naturally that that's all there is to the ruin. The ruins in Limgrave in front of the Stormgate have quite a lot. There's 2 chests above ground, and a map of the area. So it could be natural to assume that that's all there is in the ruin. The ruin in Agheel Lake actually has 2 underground areas with chests. Again, it would not be unusual to assume that you've discovered everything if you just found 1 chest and moved on. And for the final tip, you generally will not become overleveled if you stick to the areas that are associated with the nearby Legacy Dungeon. If you're like me, when you play Elden Ring or other Souls games, you are motivated and pulled by 2 very powerful instincts. Instinct 1 for me is to tackle areas and fight the bosses in such a way that I'm not overleveled. It's very important to me that I experience a certain level of challenge when I'm going through these areas and fighting these bosses, and I live in constant paranoid fear of overleveling and, as a result, not having as good a first experience with these bosses as I could have had. However, this first instinct conflicts directly with my second instinct, which is to explore and find every single thing in an area before tackling the Legacy Dungeons. I want every item, every enemy, every nearby boss in a mini-dungeon killed. Every fleeing man must be caught and every secret unearthed. I don't want to miss any items, I don't want to miss any NPC quests, I don't want to miss any dialogue. And most importantly, I don't also want to kill the main boss in the Legacy Dungeon, go off into a new area, and then come back and explore a previous area. Because then the first problem would happen, and the bosses in the mini-dungeons and those mini-dungeons would not be much of a challenge or much of an experience, it'd just be busy work. Now luckily for me, this actually isn't much of a problem, because the game resolves this issue for me in a pretty great way. It's actually quite hard to overlevel. The only way to really do it effectively is to go out of the area that you're in and go into a new area associated with a much higher level Legacy Dungeon. Let's use the starting area as an example. After your first few level ups, your level ups will start costing somewhere like 2,000, 3,000 souls per level, and it'll just keep increasing. But the various mini-bosses and enemies in the surrounding areas don't give you more souls. They give pitiful amounts. Some of the bosses give like 1,000, 2,000 souls. Even if you put together all the souls you get from the enemies in a dungeon and the boss, it will very likely not be enough for a level up. Plus, you'll lose a lot of these souls as you explore the overworld. you'll spend a lot of them on equipment or loot or spells or whatever. Sometimes you'll kill a boss in the area, get 1,500 souls, then get distracted, die with those souls on you, and not bother going to pick them up because they're not that many. So the game seems designed to me to prevent overleveling unless you're going out of your way to try. And that remains true even if you visit all the places associated with that dungeon. What I mean is East and West Limgrave and with the Weeping Peninsula. Also, sticking to these areas will retard the rate at which you become overpowered by restricting the equipment and the smithing stones that you have access to. During your early levels, the main source of your damage doesn't come from your scaling. Having a lot of strength or dexterity will usually only marginally increase how much damage you're doing. The reason for this is that your weapons scale better as you upgrade them. And plus, what constitutes a lot of strength for a level 20 character is very different than what constitutes a lot of strength for a level 50 character, let's say. So most of your damage in the early game comes from your weapon's base stats. And as a result, the upgrade level that your weapon happens to be on is significantly more important than whatever your stats are. And so the game bottlenecks your ability to become overpowered most severely by restricting what smithing stones you have access to. And in the entirety of the Weeping Peninsula and East and West Limgrave, there are almost no Tier 3 smithing stones, which means that most people that fight Godric the Golden for the first time are going to be doing so with a weapon between level +3 and level +6. Basically what I'm saying is that if you are like me, and are almost neurotically concerned with preserving your experience, but also exploring a great deal of area, you can do both at once by limiting your exploration to the areas that are associated with the legacy dungeon that you intend to tackle next. Okay, and I think that's everything. So that's the end of this video. As always, thank you very much for watching.